Okay, good morning or afternoon, depending on where you're watching and what time you're watching from. My name is Kevin Frank. I'm here with Dr. Jeff Andresen once again this week to update the weather and see what we have in the forecast for June 1st. So we've made it to June, and I guess summer is now officially here, Jeff.
It is, and there's certainly more coming. That's I think the major theme, certainly one of the major themes in the forecast here. On the lead slide here, I've got a couple of forecast images. The one on the left is jet stream conditions here this Sunday. So looking up ahead several days to this weekend. And while we do have a troughing feature currently moving across the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes for the next day or two, I think the real significant factor in terms of our longer forecast is this ridge building here. And again, not just over the upper Midwest and the Northeast, but it's right centered over the middle of the Great Lakes. On the right-hand side here, also at the same time on Sunday morning, these are predicted or projected temperatures relative to normal. And so under that ridge, unquestionably, you're going to see above normal temperatures, and that really sort of sets the stage. We're looking at an extended period of warm, and we probably can even call it hot weather here, starting on late in the week and then continuing through the weekend into early next week. So that's sort of where we're headed. Other news, of course, we have to keep track of here. We did get some much needed precipitation with that weather system we talked about last week at the end of the week. But all in all, it helped in some areas more than others. But looking at the rainfall totals here for the past week, you can see really there were two areas. One that got precipitation with the first phase of the system, which set up a little further north, I think, than that I initially had expected. And then a second area of precipitation came through the following morning and during the day. And that primarily affected or impacted southeastern portions of the lower peninsula down here. And all in all, again, you can see most areas here picked up at least half an inch. Some areas did a lot better than that. Some got 1.5 inches. Almost the yellow here is even 2 inches, but that was more the exception than the rule. The northern part of the state, in contrast to what we've seen for much of the last several weeks, you can see almost all that area was less than a quarter. But I did want to bring out an area here that was in between these two areas, the two phases of that weather system, from southwestern lower northeastward over towards Saginaw Bay and into the thumb. And that fairly large area here, which really scraped by with just about 1/2 inch and had less. And that area is still really, really dry. 1/2 inch, obviously. Surprisingly, these totals from the event at the end of the work week, plus what fell earlier, it was the wettest week collectively in several weeks. Here in Hazlet, I had to go back to the second week of April to see that much precipitation. But as you'll see here in a second, it helped temporarily, but it's just not enough to change the deficits that have accumulated here over time are significant, and it's going to take quite a bit more to really start to deal with those effectively. And here's a good example of that. This is from the airport at Kalamazoo, Battle Creek, in between, and this is looking at daily accumulation of precipitation back to the beginning of January up through yesterday. Or actually, it is up through this morning. The green line here are the actual accumulations, again, daily, and then the brown is the normal accumulation for that time. And you can see that there have really been two extended dry periods. One for the early part of the year during the winter, January, much of through February and into the middle of March. Then we had a fairly large, a very active weather pattern during late March and into early April. And then after really about the second week of April, the precipitation has really tailed off again. Here's the precip that fell late last week, again, and at this particular location, about 1/2 inch fell at Kalamazoo. But if you look at the numbers here and you look at where we should be for the end of May, you can see that we're more than 6 inches long-term deficit. That's a lot of precip. That's almost 2 months worth of precip, depending on the month chronologically. But you can begin to see why a half an inch or 6/10, it's really, really needed, but it doesn't help the long-term situation. And you can still see that the deficit is generally still widening. That's also a little bit disturbing, especially when you hear the forecast. A couple of other graphics here. This is looking at precipitation really during April and May, the past 2 months. This is the percent of normal is on the right-hand side here, and much of this area here across, especially the southern half of lower Michigan, and then northeastern portions of eastern upper Michigan, down there at or in many cases below 50% of normal, like we just saw for Kalamazoo. And the 2-month departures here you can see are generally in that 2 to 5 inch type of departure range from normal. So significantly behind where we typically are. Finally, looking at soil moisture here with the precip we did see last week, it still looks pretty red and brown here across southern lower Michigan, but it actually is a little better than it was the previous week. But still, much of this area is running from 20 to 30% of soil moisture here in the top 3 feet of the profile. But we did improve a few percent. It wasn't that much, but the precip we did get, again, it helped stabilize things really short term, but long term we still have some fairly significant deficits. And the latest issuance of the drought monitor, not much change from the previous week, maybe a percent or 2 of an increase in the D1 moderate drought category, but still the driest areas you can see here clearly on here across southern lower Michigan. A little over 6% of the state in the southwestern lower is in the D2 severe drought category. And that's, again, given the forecast, this is probably, unfortunately, going to get larger with time. You can also see that the area impacted by drought is also growing regionally, especially in areas to our west over Wisconsin, Iowa, southern Minnesota. This area up in the northern Great Plains, the extreme or exceptional drought here in the northern, that has been there for several months. But you can start to see these 2 areas here in the Great Lakes and the Northern Plains are starting to become more connected. That's also not such a good sign. In terms of temperature, with a cool Canadian air mass in place over the region here, we had below normal temperatures for most of the state. You can see 2, 3, some cases 4 degrees Fahrenheit below the normal, except for the far south, where it was close to normal. We also had several mornings late last week with almost ideal, relatively clear, calm conditions and radiative cooling. And we had temperatures flirting with the 30s on an almost daily basis. In these maps, these go from the 27th through the 30th. The hard freezes here are generally limited to these areas in blue. And you can see most of those areas impacted were in interior areas of the UP and the northern lower. But we did see, because of the conditions with radiative cooling and relatively still conditions, we did have areas, low-lying areas where cold air can drain that did have frost and or freezing temperatures. Here in Hazlet, I reached the mid-30s on 2 of those days and did have some frost, but it was not widespread. It certainly wasn't a hard freeze in most areas. And if we look at the climatology, except for the far northern parts of the state away from the lakes, we are climatologically just about at the end of where we would physically be able to see frost and or freezing temperatures. So hopefully that might be it for the season. Although it's been a long one this year, we've had a number of mornings with the threat of frost or freezing temperatures. Our degree day totals, given the below normal temperatures that we saw, means still some accumulations, and we're still in most areas a few calendar days ahead of normal. This is using a total starting on the 1st of March. So still a little bit ahead of normal. Where are we headed? Well, I've talked about summer, I've talked about warmth and heat, and that's the general theme. Today, Tuesday, we've got high pressure over the region. Remnant, it's still relatively cool air mass, but we will see relatively seasonable temperatures here. Highs generally in the 70s, a degree or 2 warmer than we were yesterday on Memorial Day. Lows tonight down a couple degrees warmer, upper 40s, low 50s in most spots. And then the next weather system of note, you can see getting it organized down here across the southern plains. that takes a turn northeastward up towards the Ohio Valley, as many systems have done here over the last several weeks. By tomorrow morning, you can see it makes it almost to southern Illinois, and it brings really the next chance, significant chance for any precip. This will be primarily in the form of scattered showers and a few thunderstorms across the state, well, statewide generally, but the best chances with this, because the system is going to remain well south of Michigan, will be across southeastern portions of the state. And for most areas, the greatest threat or highest probabilities, and they won't be high, 30, 40% typically in most areas. Late tomorrow afternoon and evening, and then into early Thursday is when we're looking for the greatest risk or threat of rain. Here's the weather map forecast for Thursday morning at 8 o'clock. You can see the center of the low pressures made it up to southern Indiana with the precipitation up into Michigan. So the best chances for precip with this system, as I mentioned, will be across the southeastern lower. It's an area that still could use more precipitation, but in general, after that system goes by later on Thursday and Friday, we will be looking at a significant warm up and an extended stretch of fair, dry, and noticeably warmer conditions as that ridge builds up over the Great Lakes, as we saw in the first slide. And so by Friday, we will see high temperatures well into the 80s, probably some in the south pushing 90, and then continue through the weekend. The 7-day precipitation forecast before again, it's a little discouraging for those that need precipitation, but you can see another drier than normal week for almost all of Michigan here, less than 1/4 of an inch, with the possible exception of the southeastern corner of the state, which with this next weather system. After this next weather system, the next chance for anything in the way of precip probably coming the latter part of next work week. So maybe the Wednesday, Thursday type time frame is what it looks like right now. But we're just not in a pattern conducive for a lot of precipitation. Once again, we're in between sort of the two streams of the jet stream. There's a lot of activity to our south and activity to our north, and Michigan just has been far too many times in between without much precipitation. I mentioned heat returning. This is a forecast of maximum temperatures on Sunday. You can see virtually all of the state well into the mid and upper 80s. I think this might be a little conservative. Remember when we dealt with all of the cold nighttime temperatures that were a few degrees colder than they typically would be because of a dry landscape? Well, the same thing happens in reverse with the maximum temperatures. So don't be surprised if we see low 90s for some high temperatures here coming up again by Friday, and then continuing through the weekend into early next week. And it goes without saying, with the much warmer air temperatures and with lots of sunshine, we're going to see a major jump up in our potential of evapotranspiration and our water demand rates. This is a forecast for daily totals on Sunday, and you can see most of these are at or even a little bit above 1/4 of an inch. That's the reference value for potential evapotranspiration, but climatologically, that's way up in the top 5 to 10% of what we typically experience here. So, and for the week, if you look at the weekly values, most of the average 7-day averages here for the next week are above 0.2 of an inch. That's the highest rates that we have seen so far this growing season. So look for a big jump in the demand for water. Keep up with that if you can, but it's going to be noticeable, and especially in those areas that have not had as much rain recently, water stress is going to become certainly very evident or an issue as we move towards the end of the week. In the medium range forecast guidance here, both the 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlook, you can see that there's that big upper air ridge right over the Great Lakes, and no surprise, the bullseye for above normal temperatures is right over the top of the region. That's a fairly high confidence with that one, unfortunately. At the same time, it also suggests, as I mentioned, being in between storm tracks, normal to below normal precipitation totals. So again, both 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day timeframes call for that same scenario. We did get an updated version of our monthly outlook for June. That's up here on the top. We looked at the new 3-month on the bottom, but it's pretty similar. The new one, which was updated on yesterday on Memorial Day, calling for above normal mean temperatures. And again, based on what you just saw, it's not a surprise. They typically weighted a little bit towards the first half of the month because the skill of those outlooks is higher in the short-term future. But note, it's also still putting Michigan and the Great Lakes in an area of normal to a little above normal precipitation totals. We just don't see a sign of that, the pattern that would lead to that increase in precipitation. There's certainly much less confidence in that than there is in the warm temperatures. But the forecast of warmer than normal weather for at least the next 1 to 2 weeks looks like a fairly good bet. So summarizing here, our best chance for precipitation coming over the next to 48 hours, and then looking at a real visit from summer, extended period of warm/hot weather, and dryness and increasing PET rates for late in the week and into the weekend. And as you just saw, at least the warmer than normal conditions are expected to continue, maybe even beyond the next 1 to 2 weeks. So I'll wrap up there and see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Jeff. So seems like you and I are kind of talking about the same thing every week. Chances of rain. At least last week we got some relief. It did help, but as I think most people are realizing, especially if you don't irrigation systems as far as turf grass goes, residential, commercial turf, you're seeing a lot of stress. And there was a little bit of relief last week, but it'll be back with those high ET rates and high temps that you got coming up. And I guess we'll just have to see what the rest of the summer holds, but certainly starting out hot and dry.
It is, and we're looking right now for some type of an obvious break, a meteorological change or break, but that upper air pattern that I showed, it one form or another, it just seems to keep returning even after short absences like late last week, and we've got to find a way of breaking that hopefully sometime soon.
Okay, appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you very much. And first week of June is off and running, so we will see you in a week's time. Thank you.
We'll see you next week.